Okay, welcome everyone. You guys get me now. I'm going to continue the discussion that we started yesterday in the accessibility guidelines from the Department of Justice. And accessibility started long, long before Department of Justice started to put teeth behind it, ADA. And we've been addressing it in a handful of different ways. This little 30-minute, actually, it's probably going to be more like 20-minute overview is meant to be an overview and not necessarily a mastery of one specific tool that I'm actually going to be emphasizing, although we can go into more detail, both in the office hours and the breakout room, or if you guys desire it in more detail, you can look at it in the construction guides um, and such. So let's start with the American with Disability Act. So the codified requirement for making sure that things are accessible, in short, in order to be able to make sure that all individuals, more specifically all Americans, because it's an American act, have equal opportunity, irrespective of the disabilities that they may have, to participate in public life. And obviously that includes education across the board. And just to be clear, that's both public and private institutions that have this requirement. And again, this is a rehash of what I mentioned a couple days ago. There are 5 titles associated with the ADA. Title 2 is the one connected to education. And governmental agencies and such like that. So just as a reminder, at least a bigger picture of it here, accessibility is both a legal and an ethical responsibility that we have. It is a painful process in order to be able to do because it takes effort that we may not necessarily uh, 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 have a great desire in order to get involved in if we are not as responsive to the ethical responsibilities that we have. So again, as a rehash, the ADA and the upcoming Department of Justice provides stronger teeth around making sure that what students have access to as course materials are accessible. And if it's online, that involves WCAG accessibility, that protocol I mentioned a couple days ago, or yesterday, that is. Um, and it's important that what we generate, irrespective of whether it's homework or it's ancillary materials or it is a textbook, has to be compliant with these things. Otherwise, we and or our campuses are subject to lawsuits, fines, and other financial penalties that we want to be able to obviously avoid. Uh, However, as I mentioned, we should just want to do this independent of the legal aspect behind it because it is an ethical responsibility that when we want to instruct the students in the class, that all the students in our class have access to the full capabilities that they're able to tap into. That is the materials that we provide. Uh, so it is just the right thing in order to be able to do, even though it requires a lot more effort in order to advance. And many of us, if not all of us, may not have the skills or the capabilities in order to understand how to make things accessible in order to, um, achieve the ethical responsibility that we want to be able to do. So our goal is to try to implement into the LibreVerse tools and guidelines in order to be able to facilitate this. And we're still in the process of tweaking things. And as I'll mention a little bit later on, even have plans of augmenting things in order to be able to address these issues. So, um, in the discussion around the Department of Justice regulations, they said that there are 2 primary mechanisms that we can use in order to address existing content that need to be brought up to standards for accessibility. And one is to hide the problem, aka archiving the problem, putting it away and saying this is stuff that doesn't matter, or completely deleting that stuff and saying let's pretend that we never had that, so therefore we have no responsibilities behind that. And that right there, I'm not overly fond of because it throws away a lot of the content that we've actually been doing for a while. Um, and starts from scratch when we don't actually have to do that. So the alternative is remediation, taking the content and fix the problems in order to be able to move forward. Naturally, it's important as you construct your content to go through as much effort as you can in order to ensure that it is up to snuff from accessibility standards. And we have real-time tools and help to facilitate that, but we also have tools to facilitate content that's been created, let's say after the fact or after the editing process in order to be able to do that. So there are five things I want to talk about in the next 20-ish minutes. One is the real-time accessibility checker. Those are on the libraries. So that right there focuses predominantly on the textbooks and what Justin just mentioned before in terms of editing the content on each of the pages of the textbook. We have post-editing bots. Justin also mentioned something like that briefly in terms of being able to go through and modify content that's already been created. We have an accessibility compliance matrix that's in our conductor. You may have seen that or played with that in your conductor page. Um, I will pull that up again in order to show what it's meant to do and how to use that. Um, I'll be discussing the AI co-authoring tools. These are relatively new because AI is relatively new. We released these things a few months ago, and they can be exceedingly powerful in terms of helping to build or construct OER, not necessarily the actual content on the pages, but all the ancillary content, the metadata that's connected to those pages. That's also quite important in order to address. And lastly, I'll be talking about the accessibility guides that we created for H5P, which is a troubling interactive that we've had issues with for many years. And it's important in order to emphasize because it's also quite popular out there in the open community. And you have access to it in the studio, which is one of the LibreVerse technologies that are in the top level of the Launchpad. So let's start with tool number one, the real-time accessibility checker. Uh, on the far right of the editor, when as you pull up a page here, you have lots of stuff. Everything or much of this was already discussed by Justin, but at the far end has a little Da Vinci Man, which is a typical sign associated with accessibility. And if you click on that, it'll open up a real-time accessibility checker. Now, this is accessed when you edit the page. So you can't just look at a page and do this in bulk. This is done individually. It's done real time because you're typically only editing one page at any one time. And before discussing what it's able to do, we should actually just give a general overview about what accessibility needs to be able to address. So the full-blown evaluation of a product or a technology is oftentimes tied together in what's called a VPAT or an ACR. Um, and VPATs take a lot of effort in order to be able to put in place. External reviewer that we have for our content and our technologies identifies 81 criteria that needs to be evaluated for the material in order to satisfy a complete VPAT review. So that's time consuming and also fiscally consuming in order to be able to implement that. That is manifested in a variety of smaller individual components that's necessary in order to be able to bring your content up to those standards. I don't have enough time in order to go through all the different aspects of accessibility, but we will be going over that stuff in one of the options in the Academy training series because it's a cohort that requires lots of effort of saying this, and we're happy in order to discuss it within that context. So, however, there are big issues that almost every neophyte editor has to overcome. And oftentimes fails to overcome in order to be able to. And that's what the real-time editor is meant to do. So it doesn't give you full-blown accessibility compliance. It just says these are the top 7 to 8 options available that are typically problems. And you need to satisfy that in order to be able to get up to WCAG compliance, but it's not the end all be all. So when you click on that, it pops up a checker here for free if you have an editor open in order to do so. This works best when you actually have content on the page, because if it's a blank page, there's not much for it to be able to evaluate. You can click the first one that says all accessibility issues. That's what I use by default. Otherwise, you can review the headings, the alt text, the tables, the links, color contrast labels, and even abbreviations, which are typically avoided. That's out there. And like I said, we would love to be able to expand this, and we have the intent in order to expand this into a much more expansive list that's out there. we're initially going to be doing that with the bots and not with the checker first because the interface requires a bit of effort for doing so. So again, this is real time. And this is an example for headings. So Justin mentioned a bit of the issues associated with headings. For individuals that are not paying careful attention to accessibility, the way that we oftentimes handle headings in a Word document is we bold a heading and we say it's a heading. However, that is not recognized for accessibility checkers or for screen readers. You need to have what's called programmatic understanding behind it. That's why you indicate this as a heading. That tells screen readers that this means something. It's not just aesthetic, which is a separate entity than programmatic or underlying concept behind there. So it goes through and identifies if you've actually, for example, bolded something, the whole paragraph, which is suggested that it should be a heading, not a not an emphasis that's out there, and it'll use that and give you some suggestions that's connected to that. There are a bit of issues associated with headings. Justin mentioned the general belief that we want to be able to keep them organized sequentially, but that's not entirely necessary in order to be able to address. For example, our boxes uh, use a heading of H5 inside here. Um, there's typically 1 to 7, 1 to 6 that you have access to of headings. H1 is the title, and then you have these numbers that are meant in order to guide the individuals down there. And our boxes are always H5, irrespective of where they are. So it violates that, but that's actually not technically a rule in WCAG. That's just a standard operating procedure that's out there. And there's reasons for doing that. Largely, you don't need to pay attention to where your boxes are on the page. They're always designated as H5, so your life is easier. You don't need to deal with that. So anyways, that's just an example that you'll have coming up here. Like I said, many of these things will have quick fixes in order to help guide them. This is an example for looking at an image and saying this image doesn't have an alt text. You can come in and say declaring it decorative or change the alt text to a caption as necessary. We have the ability in order to go through tables, identifying some of the issues that you have on tables that are there. Abbreviations, you can add acronyms and other things like that. So again, the details are not overly important here other than saying that you have access to this tool, and I encourage you that as you are writing content to use this tool because it makes it easier after the fact in order to come back and address things if you've actually been doing that. And we're, again, very happy in order to implement these things. And to my knowledge, no other OER platform does something like that. Okay, so there were a few questions off of here before I jumped to tool two. I can address there. Kelsey has a lot of text on here. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, that was more for just whoever teaches language that might see that and have some words of advice. It doesn't need to be addressed here. I'm sorry.
Okay. So one of the biggest problems with languages is that technically, if you switch from English to Spanish, you have to give a tag that says that that Spanish text is Spanish, while the other ones are in English. And that means when you have a page with lots of English and Spanish bouncing back and forth, that takes a bit of effort in order to be able to do.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
which I'll be honest, very few OER language books out there actually do that properly because it takes a lot of time in order to be able to process that. Kestrel asked the question, if you use proper formatting in your Word document, when you copy and paste in the LibreTexts, will it format? Copying and pasting from other sources, Word documents, and Google Docs, typically preserves these sort of HTML structures, but they also include lots of other junk inside of it, if you actually look at the HTML. So a lot of what we do is we clean it up. My general recommendation for people who are copying from Word and other sources is to paste without formatting and then rebuild it, because you then remove all the other junk that comes in with it, because having to clean up and extricate what is junk and not junk is particularly difficult in order to be able to do. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I encourage you to copy and paste a Word document and then look at the HTML underlying it, and you'll see all this stuff. And we pride ourselves on trying to make HTML that's very clean and easy to read. In fact, you could even use it as the direct editor if you're comfortable writing HTML because of how clean it happens to be. Um, So, Justin also mentioned, okay, so that's fine. That's a real-time accessibility checker. Again, I encourage you strongly in order to use this as you're editing. Okay. Tool number two, and this was also mentioned, is the post-editing bots. So one of the aspects that really distinguishes us from other platforms is that we're not a repository. We're what I refer to as a curatatory, which means content is hosted on our platform and we have an ownership, not in the legal definition of ownership, but a responsibility in order to curate the content and move it forward. So if there are mistakes or issues off of that, we have a curation board in order to facilitate fixing those mistakes that may be indicated by the community and coming in order to update them. And that also means for accessibility purposes, because if someone creates a page that's not accessible, we have a requirement in order to update that because we don't want to archive it. We don't want to put our heads in the sand and go la 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 in order to be able to move things forward. So we established a handful of years ago a reasonably complex global find and retrace. It was initially a global find and replace, but then became a far more expansive infrastructure of bots that basically will go through the pages in a book, in a series of books, in an entire library in order to do changes and update those changes. It's empowered by what's called regular expressions. At least that's one of the things that's empowering it. It also has JavaScript capability off of there. And anyone who has some comfort with regular expressions understands that it's a very sophisticated find and replace infrastructure, but it's also easy to chew up pages. So this is an exceedingly powerful infrastructure, so powerful that when we go into it, we have a big warning that says, if you don't know what this is, don't touch it at all. I actually bolded that out here, but you can chew up things. So only the development team has access to these bots. Um, we're looking into being able to make small, little simplified versions of them that you'll have access to in order to address things. But we're still very concerned that if you have these big, powerful bots, you'll be able to do it. So hence why we do it. Francis, I think you have a hand up. Did you want to chime? Oh, it's not a hand, it's my hand on my cursor. Okay, so nonetheless, this is available. We have two primary bots. One is called the Brad bot, and the other one's called the Alley bot. The Brad bot is named after Brad Pitt, and it makes your pages pretty. It's an aesthetic-based bot, and it's meant to standardize things, so it's easy for people to mix and match because everything is standardized in order to be able to process that. The Alley bot, Alley is short for accessibility in the community, and it's able to go in and say, these are common issues that people have, and let's revamp them and make it accessible. Um, and such. We run these things routinely. When you ask to publish a book, we run these things over your book in order to be able to get it up to the level that's out there. But we have lots of other aspects associated with these things. Okay, the tool number three, again, that you may have had or may have already played with, is that every conductor page has a box up here on this rainbow row called accessibility. If you click on the accessibility, and this right here is looking at OpenStack's General Chemistry second edition book, and it pulls up something like this. Uh, this right here is a little mini accessibility compliance review matrix. So I mentioned the acronym ACR a few minutes ago. That's essentially what this is. This is the outcome of an evaluation for accessibility. And like I said, this actually has 81 criteria in principle off of here. And those criteria are broken up into three general categories. One is the technology itself that's put in place. One is technology that we can use bots, for example, in order to update. And the other one is our components or criteria that requires human intervention off of here. Those are three general categories off of here. This only has the last two because we don't bring in the platform issues off here because it's not something you can address. And this will let you pull in the table of contents of your book. This just looks at the first 4 or 5 pages on here and lets you flip a switch when you've actually evaluated a specific criterion isn't put in place. This will be updated soon in order to be able to identify the criteria that a computer can do and switch it. For example, this criterion are all alt text under 150 characters, which is important for many screen readers. I can use a bot in order to be able to go through that and automatically tag this. We don't have that in place yet, but it's there. But I can't use a bot to say, do the images have meaningful alt text? That requires a human in order to be able to do. Although who knows what AI is able to do in order to be able to address these things. So this provides a mechanism in order to have this expansive catalog, or more specifically, an expansive checklist that you can use in order to be able to do these things. And my intent, and hopefully if this new grant comes through with the NSF, is to be able to establish a little mini center for the state of California where students from student disability centers will combine together to go through books in order to be able to address these issues. And this provides a nice way to complement the authoring from the more advanced accessibility checkers. So you can have a student that says, check this criterion, and they go through all the pages of that criterion. And it's effective in order to be able to do that and make this thing. This is overkill compared to every other infrastructure out there in the open community, but we felt it's best in order to build something for the biggest and the best situation, rather than actually saying, here are 3 checklists. You'll oftentimes say, here are 5 things that this book is accessible on, but doesn't tell you what issues are and things are in place off of that. What will happen here is that we're going to take these things and then flesh it out into a page that's in the back matter of your book. So you'll always have an update of the review of the accessibility for the pages that you have in your book. Not too dissimilar from what we have with the licenses for every page that's in the back of the book. Okay, tool number 4, Justin also mentioned this, is essentially the co-authoring tools. So these were released a few months ago. So while accessibility is over here in the rainbow roll, co-authoring tools is here in pink. The co-authoring tool is designed as a mechanism predominantly to handle meta tags or metadata. And the 2 primary metadata that we care about is summaries for pages and meta tags on pages. Meta tags meaning keywords associated with that page. That's important because when you add a keyword to a page, it then gets summarizes at the end of the book in an index. So this is a convenient way in order to be able to make an index for a book. About 80% of OER books do not have indices. And this is a mechanism to facilitate that. So you can come in and you can manually construct and write the summaries for each of the pages in each of the chapters of your book. You can add tags on the side here in order to be able to do that. Like I said, it automatically generates the index that's out there. But what we do with the AI co-authoring tools is use AI in order to facilitate that. So we can use AI in order to make all the summaries of all the pages that you have here that you can then edit after the fact, which is always a good idea with any AI generated product, or making tags that you have connected to here in order to be able to move things forward. Uh, that right there is important in order to just bring up the quality of your book to a standard that's somewhere close to what you expect for commercial books. That is, you want to have summaries, you want to have a nice index that's in place. We're going to expand this in order to have a glossary-based infrastructure. Again, the point is that for us to be able to compete with commercial products in the classroom, we need to have resources that are of appropriate quality to compete with that, and this is an important component for that. However, from an accessibility perspective, and I do this predominantly via bulk actions, you have the ability in order to click a switch on here and make it so it'll go through and identify if a image doesn't have an alt text, which is one of the real-time checkers I talked about before, and create a alt text and put it into your book. So making good alt text is a very painful process. AI is actually pretty good at doing this if you go to the right model and the right platform, which we've identified. And the platform that does this does a really beautiful job. Even complicated biochemical schemes that are really quite awkward, it can go through and do a really good job for doing that. I'm actually quite impressed with that. And it's not ChatGPT, by the way. Uh, so you have access to that. It's a strong recommendation that either you, in the process of constructing the page, run these sort of meta tags in order to bring your book up to standard. So you at least generate alt text. That's a critical issue for many, and certainly most old OER resources that are out there. Um, This is an opportunity and to make the summaries in bulk, generate the tags in bulk, or generate the image alt text in bulk. And again, we're going to be expanding that as technology advances. Interactives. So the last thing I want to mention here is associated with the fact that the requirement for accessibility applies across the board from textbook pages, ancillary pages. Any interactives that you use, either in the pages or outside the pages, have to be accessible. And that right there is a technology issue oftentimes, but it may involve manipulating or dealing with factors in creating the content that's on that technology. And the example I want to bring up here is H5P. So if you look at the LibreVerse, you have access to H5P via the studio. H5P is an interactive that's really quite popular in the last 12 years or so since it started. And it gives the opportunity in order to make interactives. Those can be assessments, or they could just be things that you play with in order to be able to learn, bring it into your book, and now your book is far more engaging. And that's one of the reasons why it's gotten popular. It is not a homework substitute, although it's one of the 4 technologies that we do introduce into ADAPT, which does make it into a homework substitute. So if anyone tells you that H5P is homework, they are lying or incompetent, and most probably both. So H5P. Um, Making H5P is beyond what I want to talk about here because I'm already a few minutes over on the time here. But the idea behind here is to many of the H5P interactives can be made accessible. Many cannot be made accessible. So it's a good question for you to ask if you haven't already done so, is what makes H5P not accessible? Well, one is if it requires fully working eyes in order to operate. For example, dragging and dropping. If you want to drag from here, move it over here, how do you go about doing that thing without having full functioning eyes? In some cases, you can do it. In many cases, you cannot do it. So it's not accessible. So that means embedding those things directly into your book as makes your whole book inaccessible and then subject to penalties associated with the Department of Justice issues that's coming here. And it's a concern that I've had quite it's been plaguing me for the last couple of months, and I put a post somewhere on uh, uh, associated with it that you can actually associate with the Academy Online entry for accessibility, that you can actually read up more on the discussion that I prompted at the Open Ed Global Connect system. So this is a review that we did several years ago, identifying color coding specifically, red, yellow, and green in terms of creating accessible H5P types. There are about 65 or so accessible types right now. Types of H5P. Not all of them are accessible. And this gives you a rough idea that actually about 10% are accessible if you do it right. You can actually make these things inaccessible. But that's outside of the scope of what I want to be able to discuss, other than saying that you want to be careful of any interactive, whether it's H5P or otherwise, in order to be able to move it forward. And you also want to be careful if anyone comes out and tells you that things are interactive, that they may not be right. And in H5P, many of them are not correct. This is an example of a workaround that we gave, an analysis of a H5P to tell people things that you want to be careful of in terms of using these things and moving it forward. They're still moving forward and updating the technology, but it's not moving very quickly. So with that, I'll end with what I actually was mentioning. There are several ways to handle accessibility issues for existing material. We can either hide it, aka archive it, or fix the problem in order to do so. Our goal is to use these tools, specifically the bots, in order to be able to go through all the OER that's been created in the past, that's been harvested in our platform, in order to bring things up to basic accessibility standards here, in order to be able to address or at least avoid the penalty issues that no doubt campuses are going to be paying attention to and evaluating whether they want to go with OER or commercial products. Because if we don't actually handle this, campuses are going to force us to go with commercial products. And one thing to actually emphasize here is that one of the Department of Justice, so the lawsuit I mentioned from the LA Community College District, that was because of a commercial product, Pearson's My Math Lab. So just because it's commercial, it doesn't mean it's accessible. Just because they say it's accessible does not mean it's accessible. So with that, I say the future is open and the future is accessible.